had people call in from all over that have been very moved and stated that they knew where they were the day that the President Kennedy was shot. They knew where they were the day that Challenger blew up, and they will never forget the day of the announcement of these two children.
Have you cried over this case?
Yes.
Howard Wells and Robert Stewart solved the mystery that for 9 days shocked us all. It was the case of their careers, but there was no cause for celebration.
We're going to make a brief announcement.
I don't think I will ever forget. I was standing by the sheriff's side.
Answered after the statement. The statement is it.
When the sheriff advised the news media as to what had happened.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children.
And the gasp from that crowd when the announcement was made, I don't think I'll ever forget that.
Last night, Wells, the Union County Sheriff, and Stewart, Chief of the State Police, revealed for the first time the inner workings of their investigation. They agreed to talk to Primetime, but only in the presence of the county prosecutor.
Your primary concern was what?
The children, always. Never anything different.
You believed her story that first night?
I believe what someone tells me until I have reason to disbelieve.
By now, we all know Susan Smith's story. Carjacker abducts her children, but releases her near a lake just outside of town. It seemed like it couldn't happen to a nicer girl, voted friendliest in her high school class, a doting mother, and above all, credible. More than most people in this town of 10,000, the sheriff had good reason to believe Susan Smith.
Sheriff, you were the godfather to her brother's children. How difficult did this make it for you to continue with your investigation?
I hurt with them, and I actually felt their feelings of despair, their devastation. And I feel with that family because of their loss.
And so they searched every way they could, by helicopter, on horseback, even underwater.
We are at ground zero with an investigation.
72 hours later, no suspect, no car, no children, nothing to corroborate Susan Smith's story.
I related throwing a rock into the water. Right after it first happens, you have ripples, and once they go away, it's hard to find where the rock was thrown.
They didn't know how close they were.
If a small child disappears, you don't just search the woods, search the neighborhoods. You interview family members.
Ernie Allen is director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's happened 34 times in just 12 years, he says. Mothers who report the abduction of their children only to be accused of murdering them themselves. The center has developed a set of guidelines that are now being mailed to 17,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. The advice to police: always assume every child reported missing is in immediate danger. Search the child's home, even if he's disappeared somewhere else. Move quickly to give the victim's parents polygraph tests. And always conduct what police call parallel investigations.
You take the information that is provided about the abductor or the circumstances of the missing child, and you pursue it, but simultaneously you interview family members.
Sheriff Wells had an advance copy of those guidelines.
Not only did we work this case, but we lived this case. We ran a parallel investigation. We ran all the what-ifs. If it didn't happen, as you said, how could it have happened? And we lived this case day to day just for the hopes of the children.
As he examined Susan Smith's story, the sheriff began to notice inconsistencies.
For example, Smith told police she and her boys were carjacked while they waited for a red light at this intersection and that there were no witnesses. The problem is this light turns red only when another car approaches the cross street. Smith said there were no other cars. Her story became less and less convincing, and yet she persisted.
They were crying, and my other child was crying for me. He said, he said, I want my mama. He said, Mama, where you going? And I told him, I said, baby, I gotta go, but you're gonna be okay. And I told him I loved him. I hollered I loved him.
We watched very carefully, and then we would carefully analyze those interviews.
What would you look for?
Mannerisms, body language, the way things are phrased, what points the person voluntarily chooses to bring up.
In another case in Florida last month, it was the way she phrased things that caught Pauline Zile. She went on television in a tearful plea for her 7-year-old daughter, Christina.
Christina, be home soon.
She disappeared, the mother claimed, while they visited a flea market.
One of the things that I thought stood out was how she referred to her in the past tense, which immediately I thought, this is odd for a mother who's looking for her child.
Detective Sue Edwards says if you think your child is alive, you wouldn't say she was a good little girl. Zile eventually implicated her husband. Both are now charged with murder.
Sheriff, you had your suspicions, and yet you never let on that you had doubts about her story.
Suspicion's not evidence. It's not fact, and it's nothing more than that. You cannot use it in court. You cannot convict anyone with it. And I deal in evidence and fact in a day-to-day law enforcement career.
How do you know when a person is lying?
You either prove it through evidence that shows it, or you have them admit to it.
Stewart and Wells also used a lie detector. Later, it was leaked to the press that Susan Smith was having problems with the question, do you know where your sons are?
I do not deny nor confirm a story that has anything to do with a polygraph test or its results.
The inconsistencies multiplied. Smith claimed that in the hours before the carjacking, she had taken her sons shopping to the local Walmart, but nobody here remembered seeing them. She said she was carjacked on her way to this neighborhood where she planned to visit a friend, but the friend wasn't expecting her, and he wasn't even home. And what about the suspect? Although they drew a composite sketch, police had their doubts that he ever existed.
And in this day and time, I'm sad to say, the public immediately wants to think that a suspect is a stranger lurking in the shadows, a predator ready to strike. We have approximately 400 murders in South Carolina every year. 3/4 of those murders are either family members or acquaintances of the victim.
3/4.
3/4.
It's got to be very difficult to start suspecting the parent.
Well, it's not a matter whether it's difficult or not. It's just something you have to do a thorough investigation.
What they really were trying to do is to get her to continually tell the story over and over again. And each time she tells it just a little bit different.
Philadelphia Police Chief Inspector William Bergman has perfected the technique. In the past 5 years, his department has solved 3 similar cases by wearing down the mother in a friendly way. Eventually, the suspect, as in the case of Etta Mumford, gets caught up in her own web of deceit.
We took her down to give her a polygraph, and as we were about to hook her up to the machine, she said, I think I better talk to you and talk about what she did with the child. She actually had cut the child up and packed the child away in a freezer, which was in the basement of her house, pushed in the corner that we had missed the first time we went through the house.
In the case of Susan Smith, it was her national television appearances last Thursday that made it clear, even to our expert in Philadelphia, that she was lying.
Did he tell you why he was taking the children?
No, sir, he did not. There was very little communication at all.
She says very little, very few details.
That's right. In fact, she's real short because she keeps saying to herself, I've told this story so many times. I really wonder what I said before. And every time I go to talk about this, am I going to lie a little bit more? I was watching her sitting there, her eyes started to roll and things of this nature. So I would think the law enforcement people here probably wanted her to go in here and probably wanted to get a look at her on TV, talking about the incident, see how she's reacting, see how she's talking.
She doesn't look like a killer.
She's the murderer. She's the murderer. And just like we sit here shocked, everybody who saw this on national TV saying the same thing. How could you do that? How could she say it? Look at the way she acted, and she's the murderer.
Do you ever say to them, we think you're lying?
I wouldn't say so.
Why not?
I wouldn't say that to a person until I was sure.
But just hours after that final television appearance, Sheriff Wells was sure enough to bring Susan Smith to her moment of truth. And he did it in part by using a time-honored police technique, the bluff.
Primetime has learned that the sheriff took Smith to a church and told her he had proof that she was lying and that the inconsistencies in her story would soon become public knowledge. That's when this 23-year-old mother confessed.
Susan, why
did you do it, Susan? Why?
She admitted that on the night of October 25th, she let her car with her babies inside roll into the lake. The Mazda and two tiny bodies were recovered. Sheriff Wells immediately boarded a helicopter for his next and toughest assignment of all, to tell a close friend that his nephews were dead and that their mother would be charged with murder.
The loss of two small children that the entire family loves, that's utter devastation, and I can feel with them and I share with them in their loss.
As for the scene of the crime, the lake is now a memorial to the children.
People go there just to see it, people from miles and miles away. Flowers are placed there on a regular basis. People that become so emotionally involved in the case want to go to some place or be with something that is associated with the case.